Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I am Prashant and in this video we are going to build a complete Crud application using Spring Boot and Data JPA. For the database we are going to use the MySQL database, and for checking all the endpoints we are going to use the Postman API. Now before directly starting to make the project, let's first understand what should our project look like. Means what is the architecture of our project. If we are able to understand our architecture, then there is a lot of things that make sense when we are writing our code or writing our project, right? In this video, we are going to build an employee management system step by step and clearly understand what each layer does. We are not going to write only the code, but we are going to understand our whole code, our whole procedure, so that we can able to make our own logics, our own filters, our own code and fit inside the code on a particular place. So at first we are going to understand what each layer or what should be our architecture does, right? So here architecture means our whole flow of the project, how the communication is happening between the layers, between the front end and back end, and how they talk to each other, and how our application talk to the back end, and why we need to use the JPA, right? So let's begin. Now the first component is the client. Client means our browser who are sending the request and who is waiting for the response. It may be our Postman or another API as well. Now after that, here is our whole Spring Boot application. Now our client sends some request to the Spring Boot application and our Spring Boot application sends back the response accordingly, right? Now let's understand each layer we are going to build in the Spring Boot. Now our client doesn't talk or doesn't send the request directly to the repository or the database, right? At first there is a layer who takes all the responses, right? So there is a controller. Our controller is responsible for taking all the requests and sending all the responses to the client. Now the client sends a request to our controller, but the controller doesn't have the business logics. The controller only says, okay, this is the request and this operation should be performed. But the controller doesn't perform by itself. It uses another layer of the Spring Boot, that is the service layer. Here controller be like, okay, I get this type of response and I need to perform this operation. So what controller does, it requests to the service to do this operation. And the service layer here is responsible for all the business logics, all the filters, all the things that we are going to perform on a particular data. And the service layer is responsible for taking and fetching the data from the database. So till now we are updating and fetching the data from the database directly using the JDBC, right? But now we are using the data JPA. So service itself doesn't talk to the database. Then to communicate with the database, we have something called JPA. JPA is nothing but a Java persistence API. Now, because JPA is an API, so there is a lot of interfaces. We called it repository. And in this repository, there are various abstract methods. And service is going to use those methods to talk to the database. Now, abstract methods do not have any body. It have only the implementation. So all the methods, the abstract methods inside the repository interface have not any body, right? So if repository have not body, then how could our service layer use those repositories, right? And here comes the magic of JPA. What JPA does is, JPA creates an implementation class of that repository interface, right? We called it proxy sometime, we called it implementation sometime, right? And our service layer talks to that proxy classes rather using the repository, because we cannot use the repositories method, right? We have to use the implementation one. So we are going to use the proxy classes of that particular repository. Now we don't have to implement any method logic of the repository. The JPA does by itself. We only have to mention the abstract methods on the repository and our JPA will automatically makes the implementation method accordingly. It may sound like confusing for now, but during the implementation on our project, it will feels like very easy, that we don't have to do anything. JPA will do all the things, connection statement, prepare statement, result set. We don't have to do anything, right? We just have to use those methods that is implemented by the JPA. It is that simple, right? Now, once the JPA class processes the data from the database, right, it sends back the response where those methods are called in the service layer. Now, if we want, we can again make some operation on the result, right? And after performing some operations or processing, the service layer sends back the response to the controller, and controller sends back to the client, so that client can have some type of response, right? Now I hope you would able to understand the flow of our project. Now there are two important things that we have to discuss. At first, how do we transfer the data from one layer to another layer? It is very important to understand how we are going to transfer the data. We are not going to transfer the data with the help of some methods and multiple parameters, because let's suppose we are going to register a student and student have filled 10 data, right? 10 data. Now in a table we have 10 columns to store those data. Now when we are going to transfer our data from controller to service to the proxy classes, then all the 10 data we have to pass from the parameters or something, right? So we don't do that. And if it is not, then what we use? We use two things. First is entity and second is model. Now, whenever a client gives any request, at first we mapped all the things in the model, and then we pass the data from controller to the service using that model container. The model and entity are basically the same thing, but the entity means the actual table that are going to build in the database. Because we are going to use the JPA, we don't have to make the tables as well, right? JPA will do it for ourselves, right? We don't have to make columns, we don't have to make the tables. The entity class here will make the table, and the entity type is also declared on the JPA side as well, so that JPA will understand what should be our project look like, right? And in the other hand, the models are basic data transfer objects. It only contains some data and is used for passing the data from one layer to the another layer. While entity can be also used as a model, but entity is the real entity or the table that we are going to use in the database. Both models and entities are nothing but containers, so that we don't have to write a lot of parameters and remember all the sequences of the parameter. We generally use the object of a particular model. Then we are going to set all the data that we are going from the client side. Generally what we do, we make an object of the model in the controller, right? And all the data that we are getting from the client side, we put to that model. Now we pass that particular object to the service. Now service fetch those data from the model object and passes it to the another business logics or another filtration and another operations, right? And if it is necessary, it wraps all the data in the entity object and passes it to the JPA. Then JPA will perform the operations accordingly. If this sounds confusing, not need to be worry about it. When we are going to implement all these things, it makes more logical and more things will be clear to you, right? Now let's start developing the project, right? At first, go to your favorite browser. Now we are here in the Chrome and Google. Just write Spring Initializer. Just click on the first link, that is start.spring.io, right? Now click on the Maven right here, Java. Then we are going to use 4.0.2. Now on the artifact you can write, I am writing the name of the project is employee management system, and we can write the spaces on the name as well, right? Here as well we can use this. Okay. Now on the group I'm going to write pcodes.jp project, right? And here I'm going to write EMS for the package name. You can write your own. I am writing this. This is an employee management system project using JPA. Right now, packaging is jar, and the configuration file we are going to use the properties file, and we are going to use the Java 17. You can choose your own, but 17 is fine. Go to the dependency. At first dependency we are going to use is Spring Web, right? Then the second dependency is we are going to use the Spring JPA, that is Spring Data JPA. Then for the database we are going to use the MySQL database, so we have to add the MySQL driver dependencies as well. And for now this is enough dependency that we need. Just write on the generate. Now our project has been generated. Now go to the file explorer, right? Then downloads. Then you'll be going to find your project here, right? Just right click on it, extract all, and extract. Here is your project. Now we are going to open this project in our IntelliJ IDEA. We are using the IntelliJ IDEA here. You can use your own IDE as well, right? So let's open the IntelliJ IDEA. Just click on the open. Go to your project, downloads, then employee management system, and then this, right? This, then select folder. Just trust this folder, and here our project has been opened. Now just wait for some time. There is something here. Now we have opened the project in the IntelliJ IDEA. Now what if we are going to run this project directly, right? Just go to the Java, and this is the main application or the entry point of this Spring Boot application. The execution of this Spring Boot application starts from this file, right? The Spring Boot application @ this annotation. Now let's run directly. So we are going to maybe hit an error. Our application failed to start, and this is because we are using the JPA here. If we are using the JPA, then there are some configurations that we have to do at first, right? Now before writing the configuration, let's make the database on the MySQL so that we can able to give the database and the root and password on this configuration here, right? So open the MySQL command line, then write your password, then create a database. First create database, let's say JPA EMS, right? Just click here, then use JPA EMS. And if we want to see all the tables that is inside the database JPA EMS, then we can use the show tables, and we can see there is an empty set, right? And that's all for this MySQL. We don't have to do anything in the MySQL, just have to create a database. Now just close it. Now here we have to write all the configurations one by one. At first we are going to set the data sources configuration first, that is our URL, root and password that we have given on the JDBC. If you remember, for building the connection on the JDBC we have to give the 3 properties, that is the URL, username and password. And here also at least we have to give the 3 data here, right? Now the first configuration is our URL, database URL, right? So we are going to write spring dot data source dot URL and is equal to JDBC colon MySQL localhost 3306, and here our database name, that is JPA EMS, right? Then spring dot data source dot username, and for the MySQL the username is root, then spring root data source dot password, and here is our password, our MySQL password, right? Now that's all for this data source. Now we can add the configuration of the Hibernate as well. So now we are going to give some configuration for the JPA as well, right? So spring dot JPA dot Hibernate, then DDL auto, and it is update. Now this configuration is very important. Okay, one second. That's DDL, data definition language, right? Now this configuration is very important because with the help of this configuration the JPA would able to know what the operation should be look like. It means if it is not created, right, it will create, and if it is created then it will update this. If the data of the primary key, generally it is the ID, if it is already present in the database, then it will not create the another one, it will just update this, right? And if it is not created, then it will create a new one, new data, new row, because with the help of this the JPA would able to understand if there is no any table or column that is present inside our database, then the JPA will create them, right? And therefore we don't have to create the tables manually on the database. The JPA will create by itself, so we don't have to create manually, right? Now we are going to add another configuration, that is spring dot JPA dot show SQL, and that is true. Now from this line we are telling the JPA that whichever query we are using for the database, let show me, right? Now we are going to make the packages for each layer, right? Example, if we want to make the controller, then it should be in the controller section or controller package. Similarly, for the service we are going to use the service. For the entity we are going to use the entity. For the model we are going to make a model section here, and for the repository we are going to use repository. And please note that and make sure all your packages is under this p codes, and all your whatever your packages, right, inside the packages, not outside the packages, right? Inside the Java there should only one package should look like this, and all your packages are inside the main package where the main class has been declared, right, on the parallel. If we talk about in the hierarchical form, then all the classes and all these packages are siblings, right? All are in the same level. So now we have created and configured our project, right? Now what we have to do is we have to make our project working, right? Now before you start implementing anything, it is recommended to use the entity class first, right? So we need an entity class, so just right click it, new, then Java class. This is the particular entity, or this will become our table in the database, right? So let's first make the entity first, that is in our case it is employee, and it is of type class. Just click on the enter. Now it is just a class in Java, right? This is not an entity. To make this entity we are going to use the annotation entity like this, right? So now JPA will able to understand the JPA have to make a table for the employee. Now JPA will able to understand that a table is required with name employee, right, in the database. Now at first, if we are using the entity, we also have to use the ID. ID is basically the primary key which is uniquely identified on the table, right? So basically we are using a long value of the ID, right? Long ID, and it should be private. Now this will be our employee ID, and to tell the JPA that it is our ID, right, we have to make the ID annotation here, right? Now what if we want that our ID should be auto increment by 1 whenever a new employee will register, right? To use that, we are going to use another annotation, that is generated value, this annotation. And on the property, we are going to use that strategy should be the generation type and identity. Because we are using MySQL, therefore we are using the identity, right? So this tell the JPA that this ID, particular ID, will be automatically generated by the JPA. So we don't have to provide the ID for storing the employee, right? Now there are some other fields. Let's take name, then private, maybe the department, then private, then let's take salary, and let's take the wrapper class salary. There is no any mandatory, you can use the primitive. I am using the non-primitive, the wrapper classes instead of the primitive data type, right? Now let's make the constructors. So right click, generate, then constructor, select none. There is a non-parameterized constructor there. Then again right click, generate, then constructor, select all, then OK. So there will be a parameterized constructor as well, right? After that, after taking the constructors, we are using the setters and getters, right? So right click, generate the setter and getters, getter and setters, just OK. So we will have the setter and getters. Now we are going to also use the toString if needed, right? So generate toString and then OK. So this will be our entity class, right? Now if we have this entity class, then we must have the repository which uses this entity class, right? So just right click on the repository, new, and Java class, and here let's suppose employee repository, and it will be the interface that we have also discussed, right? Interface. Now this will extends the JPA repository, this one, the JPA repository, and it will take the two type. The first type is our class type or entity type, right? Then the second type is our ID type, that is long. Here the employee is this, right, this type, and the ID is of type long, and this is this one, right? So our repository has been prepared. Now for now we don't have to do any other operations, we just have to extend an JPA repository, right? It is the inbuilt interface that the JPA provides, right? And inside this repository there are a lot of abstract methods that we are going to use in our project later, right? And we will going to see, right? Now we have an employee entity, right, the table, and the repository, the layer who talks to the database, right? And what if we just run this part of code? Now we can see our project has been run successfully, right? The Tomcat started on the port 8080. Now the one thing is also important, that is the hibernate message here. Now because we don't have the employee table at first, right, so it created the table for me, right, this one. So this is the benefit of the JPA, right? Or we can say the hibernate. JPA basically uses the hibernate features, right? So this is the magic of the JPA, that we don't have to do anything. All the things is handled by the JPA itself. If we want to verify this, right, we can stop our server and rerun our project again. Here also the Tomcat has been started. Now you can see there is no any hibernate message because our table has already been created, right? So the JPA don't create the things that exist before. It can if we change some properties on our configuration. So for now we don't require this, right? We have created our repository, we have created our entity. Now to communicate with the repository, we need the service layer, right? So let's make a service class for this, that is employee service, right? And to make a component, we use the service, right? Now this is our service layer, right? Now let's make a method. Let's suppose employee, or let's suppose for now it's void. Now add employee, right? And it will take the employee object for now, right? Now for now it is taking the employee object, whoever uses this employee service, but it is not the true, because we are not going to use our entity class to communicate from the controller to the service. We can use it, okay, but for the safety purpose we don't use it. So what do we use? We use the models, right? So we will create a model, create class, and the model name should look like employee add request, something like this, right? And it will hold some data like private string name, private string, what was it, department, and private double salary, right? So these are the data, right, which we are going to take from the user, that is the request, okay? And these much of data are transferred from the controller to the service, right? So let's make also the constructors. Make the setter and getters, or getter and setters. Okay, we don't need the toString. So the object of the employee add request is given from the controller to the service, and in the service, instead of the employee, right, what we are getting, the employee add request, that is request. So this is the request object, okay? Or we can say the data that is given by the controller, right? We take this object from the controller. Now we have to write some logics or operations inside the service method, right? So that this request data, okay, all the data inside this request object will be stored in the database, right? At first let's stop our server, minimize it. Now for this we will going to use to make an employee object, right? And this object and this object is very different. this is object of the employee add request and this is the object of employee. Both are different classes, and for now there is no any direct relation for the employee add request and employee, right? So we have to manually give or set all the data from the request to the employee object. It's like employee dot set name, that is request dot get name. So we are getting the name from the request and setting that name on the employee object, right? Then employee dot set department, that is request dot get department, and similarly employee dot set salary is request dot get salary. Just like this. Now our employee object have all the data, right, which is given by the user from this object. Now we have to add the data of this employee object to our database. So for this we need the repository, right? So to use the repository we cannot directly make the object of the repository because we cannot do that, right? Because repository is an interface, and in Spring Boot we don't do like this, right? We don't make the object manually of any component. What we does, we call the object from the Spring Boot, right? So what we does is private, then that is employee repository, that's employee repository, and let's suppose repository, right? And we want that the Spring Boot automatically inject the dependency of that employee repository to this repository object reference, right? For this we use the annotation autowired. Now with the help of this annotation, the Spring Boot perform the dependency injection on the repository, right? So now we have the object of the child class of this employee repository interface, right? And it is injected by the Spring Boot. So we don't need to worry about it. What is the name of the child class? Where is present the child class? We don't need to worry about it because it will all handled by the Spring Boot. So we don't have to worry about from where the object of this employee repository came from. We just have to focus that we have the repository object, right? Employee repository object. So we will going to use this repository, right? So let's use it. So in the repository there is a method called save, right? Save, and it is inbuilt, therefore we don't have to write or declare anything, right? So save is an inbuilt method of the JPA repository, so we are going to just use it, and it is also implemented by the JPA child class, which is handled by the JPA as well, right? So we don't need to worry about that also. We have to only use those methods, right? And therefore we are using the JPA. We are using JPA, it means we don't have to write the implementation part, right? That we were doing in our JDBC or JDBC template or Spring JDBC and all, right? So in repository we simply pass the entity class object, right? So this repository will find out, okay, this is the employee object of this entity. And how repository is going to find out it? Because of this, right? We are making our repository of type employee, therefore it will accept the object of the employee, right? Therefore we cannot directly pass the request to that repository method. We have to convert, or we have to pass or map all the data from the request to our employee object, and that's how the JPA is working, right? Now our service method has been ready, right? Now before moving forward, let's use this method and check it is working or not, right? So to use it, if you recall, the service methods is called by the controller. So we have to make an controller. Let's make an controller, that is employee controller. Now this is a plain class as before. Now for controller, we are going to use the REST controller, right? Because we are going to perform the HTTP calls and responses and requests. Therefore, we are going to use the REST controller, right? Now this become our controller. Now let's declare a path of this class, right? So in controller, if someone wants to use this class, then what should be the path, right? So we generally use the request mapping, this one, and in the parameter we will pass a string of that type, that is, let's suppose employee, right? And if we want to check this is working or not, let's make a simple method public string, let's suppose check, and it will return simply server is running. Like this, right? Now to use this method, we have to also declare the request type or path for this method after the employee, right? So we are using get here, okay? Get mapping is for the get request, okay? There are a lot of methods for the request. For get request, I am using for the get request, okay? So for the get request, we are using the get mapping, and in this we will pass a string after the employee. Let's suppose a check is there, okay? So if we hit the /employee then /check, then this method should work, right? Let's check it. So for checking this endpoint, let's first run our application. Okay, so our server has been started on 8080 port, right? So for checking it, I am using the Postman, right? So for now I am using a new collection, that is employee management system, right? For this I am going to have a new request, so add a request. In default it is get, let's suppose check. I'm giving the name check for this. Now here is the URL should be http://localhost:8080, then our endpoint, that is employee/check. Now make sure it should be get, because we are using the get mapping, right? Just send the request and we can see the server is running. What if we give a wrong method here? So it will throw an exception that method not allowed, right? So we have to give the get if we are using the get mapping on this particular endpoint, right? The server is running. Now let's write some code for adding an employee, right? So let's stop the server again, minimize it. For this we will use public string add employee, and here the employee request add request, that is request. Now again, to use this method we have to declare a method type, and for this, because we have to get some data from the body of the request, so we will use the post mapping. In the post mapping I am saying just add /add. Okay, so whenever an endpoint hit on the post method and after the employee, the post method /employee/add, so this method will be performed, right? Now here comes another important part, and what is it? From the client, that is from the Postman, if we are getting some value on this particular endpoint, then it is in the form of JSON, right? JavaScript object notation, JSON form, right? And if it is so, then we have to map all the JSON value according to our object, because it is the Java, right? And Java don't directly understand the JSON, right? So we have to map all the data of that particular value in our request object, right? Now the interesting thing is we don't have to do this manually, right? The Spring Boot handles by itself using the Jackson. If you see all the external libraries, then there is something called Jackson, right? So Spring Boot uses Jackson and map all the JSON file according to our object. We only have to do to use an annotation, that is request body. Request body. So using this request body, it means we are expecting from the user or client a JSON data which will be mapped on this request object, right? So therefore we have written the request body, and this request body is handled by the Spring Boot, so we don't have to do anything. Now we can say we have all the data from the JSON to our request object. Now we have to just send these data to the service layer. And how do we do that? Similarly, like repository, right? We will make an private employee service and let's suppose service, right? And we will use the auto wired here, right? So that Spring Boot will automatically makes the dependency injection according to this object, right? Now we simply going to use this service dot add employee that we have already built and passes this request, okay, right? And we return successfully, right? If there is no any error while adding this request, okay, or this data, we can see data here for more clarity, okay, getting the data and passes it to the service, okay. So if this service, okay, if this service added this data successfully, then the flow again comes to the controller and this will return an employee added successfully string, right? And we can check from the Postman as well. So let's first run this project. Okay, now what are the model requests? So we need these data, right? So for this, let's make another request, okay, and it is add employee maybe, okay. For this we will use the employee slash add, and for the method we are going to use the post because we have used the post mapping, right? Now if we try to hit the endpoint without any body, let's see what happened. So this throws an exception, that is bad request, okay. So we have to give the body in row and JSON form, right? Just, and in the body we will pass the name, let's suppose Prashant. Now the department, let's suppose the HR department and the salary is, let's suppose 20,000, that is 20,000 or 2 lakh, okay, that's 20,000. Now send the, hit the request. Now we are able to see the employee added successfully, right, message, and this came from the controller. Now let's understand the flow, right? When we hit the send button, a request comes from the client, right? It goes to this employee controller, it checks slash employee, then slash add. It has some data on the body, right? Now the Spring Boot mapped those JSON data according to our employee request data, right? It mapped the name according to the name, department according to the department, and salary according to the salary, right? So employee add request have this data have all the data that came from the JSON, right? Now what we have done is we said the service कि hey service, we have this data of employee at request, just add this data to the database. So what service does is, in the service, what it does, it takes the data, okay, makes an employee object of that particular entity, okay, added all the data from the request to this employee object and said repository to save the data on the database of this employee object, right? So our database have the particular employee data on a particular row, and we can verify this. Okay, go to your MySQL command line, enter your password, use the database name was JPA EMS. Now if you want to see all the tables, then there is a table exists here, right? Now let's check all the data in the employee table, right? So select star from employee. So we can see there is one data, right? One is automatically added from the MySQL, right? And department name is HR, name is Prashant Poddar, and salary is 20,000. All the data has been added to our table, right? And it is done by the JPA, and we can see, okay, we can see the SQL command as well, right? Insert into table name, that is employee, then department name and salary and values accordingly. If you remember, this is a prepared statement, right? So we don't have to do anything. All the thing is handled by the JPA, right? So just minimize it. Right. So this is how we added a data from the client to the table using the Spring Boot and JPA, right? Now let's improve something. Now let's talk about what if we are giving the department something like departments is HR, right? And if we try to send, then we can see employee added successfully. But this time, if we see in our table, right, the department is null, right? So be careful when you are writing the keys, right? The keys in the JSON, it should be matched according to this, right? And if it is not, we have to declare all the keys manually. So it don't need to do that. We basically have the same key that we are using the variables, the instance variables in this request, right? So that our data should be consistent. Let's suppose Amit Kumar. Okay, it added successfully. Now if you see the data, it is HR, right? So this is how we add the data to the database. Now there needs some clarification as well. And what is it? For now we only get this string, right? But instead of it, I want that it should print the ID and the name of the particular employee, right? So for this we have to make another model, right? And it is like employee add response. Now for this we only need the ID and the name, right? Let's make the constructor here, select none, select all, getter setter, make the getter setter here. Now go to the service, right, employee service here, and this method, the save, returns the updated value, the saved value on the database. It is the employee, it's saved or stored employee. Okay, so this employee is the stored employee. Now why we need this? because the request doesn't have any ID, right? The IDs came from the database. So therefore we have to store the data or response coming from the database or JPA method, right? So we will return the new employee add response, and in this we will use the parameterized constructor, that is the stored employee dot get ID and stored employee dot get name, right? And this is, and instead of void we will use the employee add response like this. So what we are returning from the service method is we are returning an object of the employee add response of the stored data ID and the stored data name, right? So in the controller we are using this method here, right? So instead of it we will simply return, because this is also returning something, we'll simply return this, right? And instead of string we will use the employee add response like this. Now if we are restart our server, go to the Postman, okay, it should work. Okay, now go to the Postman and let's suppose 30,000 and Ankit Sinha like this. Go to the, let's suppose, developer, send the request, and here we can see the data came as an ID 4 and name Ankit Sinha, right? So in this way we can customize our request data, our body data, and our response data with the help of the models. Therefore models and entity are different thing. Okay, now if you notice that when we are returning any object from the controller, right, here we are returning the employee add response object, right? Then we are getting an JSON format data, right? And why this happening? Because our Spring Boot application again converts our object to the JSON format data, right, with the help of Jackson, right? So we don't even need to convert our whole data into the JSON format using another JSON libraries or something. Spring automatically handles these things, right? So we don't have to convert our data on the JSON format, right? We only need to pass an object. Now if we try to pass an primitive data or string, then it is not in the form of JSON, right? Because for converting any JSON, Spring needed something called key or value pairs, whether it's an object or a map. Now if we don't want to return any object of our manual models, then we can use the map object, right? We can create a map putting some value on the map in the key value pairs, right, and return the map. So our Spring will automatically convert those map value according to the key and value pair on the JSON format, right? So either we can use the map or the better use a model object, because the model object can be used again and again in further in the application, right? So it is recommended to use your model instead of map. And if you want to give one time data or something, you can use the map as well, right? Okay, let's do that with a map, right? So what we are doing is we will say we are returning a map of string and the employee add response, this thing. Now import it. Now returning the map dot of, and let's suppose this is the key will be our data, right? And the actual data will be our service add employee data, right? This one. Now this map will wrap the whole data in this key value, right? And we can see that right? So now if I am writing, let's say Ajay Kumar, and let's say senior dev, and it's about, let's suppose 75,000. Now sends. Now here we can see our whole value came with a key data that we have passed here, right? We have passed the data here. Therefore we are getting the object of object, right? This is an object and this is also an object, right? So our data is here key, right? Data is the key here that we have passed from there, and this is the value that is getting from the service, that this is getting from the service, right? So we can do the both, but prefer to only return this one, right? Until the map is needed, right? So let's again, okay, we have not restarted. Okay. Now again sends the data. Again we have our normal one object, right, with key ID and name. Now this is all about adding the data, adding an employee to the table, right? Now what's about fetching the data? Because for retrieving the data we are using the database, MySQL database. Again, if you want to see the data, you have to write the select star from employee in the MySQL, right? So that we can able to see our whole employee. But we don't want to do this. We want to make an endpoint so that we can able to get all the data of the employee, right? So for this we have to make another service. We don't require the entity again because we have an entity, right? We have an repository, so we have to add a new method here, right? Just minimize it, and I want to write another service method, that is, and it will return the list of employee, right? And let's say our get all employees, right? It will not take anything in the parameter because it will only return all the employees that are present in the particular table, right? So let's import it, the list java util. Now for this we can use the repository method, that is repository dot find all, right? It is also an inbuilt method of the JPA repository and implemented by the JPA, so we don't need to worry about their implementation. We have to only use the methods of the repository, right? So it will return the list of employee, right? So we will simply return the whole list. Now we are going to use this method in the controller, right? We have to again make a method public and it will return the list of employee for now, right? And now get all employees, again it will not take anything, right? And for mapping we will use the get mapping, right? And slash all, let's suppose all employee slash all, then it will hit this method. Now it will simply return service dot get all employees. Now from the controller this request goes to the service, right? Service, and from the service we are fetching all the data from the repository. And for the repository we don't have to implement find all because it is already implemented on the child class or proxy class, okay? And I am saying again and again for this repository because don't get confused that we are using the JPA. So there are inbuilt methods that we are going to use, right? Now let's check our endpoint. Again restart our server. And let's make a new request of get all employees. here we will say it's all, and the type is get, right? Now send. So we can see we are getting the list, right? Here if you notice, we are returning all the data of the employee because we are returning the entity of the list of entity, right? So if we want, we can change that. If we want that, we only want the ID and name of all the employees, not all the data, right? So what we will do, we will either create a new model, okay, according to our requirement, or if the requirement is the same, right, we can use our previous models, right? So from the service, let's make some changes. From the service, we are not returning the list of employees, right? Instead of it, we will return the employee add response, not response, right? So we cannot return the list of employees because repository will return the list of employees. So we have to catch or store the list of employees here. Let's say db employees equals, right? So in the db employees, we have all the employees from the database, right? Now we have to make the employee add response as much as our employee has, right? So we will have to make the employee add response, right? Now employees is equal to new array list. Now we are going to iterate this whole employee data, right? So for employee emp or e in our db employees, right? For each employee data, we will going to make a new object of the employee add response. So employee add response, let's suppose EAR, right? New employee add response. Now we are going to add the data of employee on employee add response. Set ID, get ID, now our employee add response object have the required data, right? Now we have to add this object, okay, with these data to the list of the employee add response, right? So we will say employees dot add and employee add response object like this. So what we have done, we have iterated all the database value employees, right? And for each employee object, we have created the employee add response object, right? We have feeded the employee add response data with our employee object, the current employee object which are iterating, right? And after setted all the data to the particular object, we have added that particular object in our required list, right? The employee add response list. Now after the iteration end, we will simply return the employees like this, right? So from the service, we are returning the employee add response. So in the controller, we have to make changes. We have to also return here employee add response like this. Now if we are going to restart our server and right, and if we hit the particular endpoint, then we can see we are getting now only two data, right? So this is how we can get our required data. Okay, either we use our entity model if we want all the data, and if we don't want it, we don't want all the data, we can use our model as well, right? It depends on us what we required and what we need to give as a response to the client, right? And this is all done in the service layer, right? Therefore it is called the business logics, right? All the logic and all the things on the data and on the responses we are doing in the service layer. The controller only tells which type of operation we need to do, right? Therefore, it is called controller. It controls the data flow, that this is the request, this is the particular endpoint, and this is the request. So what should be our required operation? Therefore, it is called the controller, right? Now we have fetched or retrieved our data. We have created, right? We have fetched all the data. Now what if I want to fetch the data according to the ID, particular ID, employee ID, right? Because if you see, right, in the Postman, if we are hitting this employee detail, right, and send it, then we are getting the employee detail of all, right, all the employees. But we don't want it. We want to search a particular ID in the employee table, right? It's similar like the where clause, right, where ID is equal to this. So for this, if it is the ID, then also we don't have to do anything. If it is the name or something, we have to do some logics here, right? But before going there, let's first search from the ID, right? So again, in the service layer, we will create a new method like public, and it will return the employee add response, right? Get employee, and we are expecting here the ID, right? On the basis of this ID, we will going to search. So if ID is equal to null, then return null. We don't need to pass anything. Now the first approach is, let's first find all the employee IDs, right? And we are trying to search, okay, for loop search and find our particular ID, and we will return that employee add response. But this is not the efficient way, right? So for searching any ID or something, our repository have inbuilt method that is find by ID, right? So let's use the method that is repository dot find by ID, right, and with particular ID. Then it will return the optional value, right, optional data value. So optional of employee, our DB employee, right? So here is the optional term here. Optional is nothing but a container which contains the data, our result, our response, so that our JPA will never give the null value to us, right? The optional will handle the null values as well, right? Therefore, the JPA returns the values in the form of optional, right? And if we want our value directly, right, like employee, we want our employee because this is the repository of the employee. So what can we do? That we can say the optional, if you find the ID, then return the employee, right? And if it is not, then or else give the null value, right? So the optional have a lot of inbuilt methods, so that we don't have to write if and else again and again. Or instead of this, if we want to throw an error, so we can also use the or else throw and passing the exception like this, right? And passing a message employee not found. So we don't have to write the try catch or if else if we use the optional methods, right? So for now we will simply return, we can return the exception, right? So let it be, okay, we are returning an exception, runtime exception, that is employee not found, right? Now once we got the employee, we have to return the employee add response object, right? Again we have to make employee add response, or we will simply return the new employee add response, and we will take the db employee .get id and db employee .get name like this. So we have used here the constructor, okay, direct constructor, parameterized constructor, for making an object and returning that particular object, which is the employee add response, right? Now once we have created our service, let's check from the controller. Let's make a method first, public. There is an employee add response, get employee by id, right? And here we are going to accept an id from the user, right? Now for this we again use the get mapping. Get mapping is for retrieving the data, right? Post mapping, here we have used post mapping, is something which will create something new in our table. This is for create, this is for retrieve or fetch, right? This is also for fetch. Get mapping is for fetch, post mapping is for create, right? Now the endpoint should be like this, slash id and slash, in the curly braces we are getting the id, and this is called the path variable. Or we can also use, instead of path variable, we can also use the parameters, like this, but we don't generally use this. We directly write the param variables directly in this, but let's first do with the path variable, right? So there is a path variable id, and for getting this particular data and mapping on this, we are going to write the path variable, right? Variable which is present on the path, therefore it may be, therefore we call the path variable, right? So this id will be fetched from the curly braces of this id, right? Now we will simply return the service dot get employee and passing the particular id like this, right? And okay, we are returning the exception here. Okay, so let's check it. Go to the Postman again. Now make another request, like this, and instead of all we are going to pass id slash, let's say 2, right? And send. Now we are going to have the employee data with the id is 2, right? Now what if we are giving the id which is not present in our table, right? Let's see. So we can see there is an internal server error, and we can see the server error is like Java lang runtime exception, which is employee not found. But if you notice, our server had not stopped, right? So we can again check with some other data like this, right? So because we have returned here, from here, the exception, therefore we are getting the exception. If we returned from here, let's suppose we are returning here the null value or else the null, right? Then restart it. Okay, we are going to have an exception here, right? Because if it is null, in any case, if it is null and we are fetching the data from the null, therefore it will throw an exception, right? Null pointer exception. So for preventing them, we can say if db employee is not equal to null, right, then we will use this, right? And if it is, then we will simply return the null value, right? If the database employee is not null, then we are going to make another object employee add response and passing the database value accordingly, right? And we will return this object. Now if the DB employee will become null, then it will return the null. It is the ternary operator that we are going to use here. Now let's again check. Okay, go to the Tomcat. Again we got 200 OK and our data, right? And what if we write something like this? So again we got 200 OK, but we don't have any data, right? But we don't get any type of exception here, right? So we can do the both according to our situation or scenario, right? But if we want to see all the employees whose department is HR, right? We are not getting the department here. Never worries. So what if we want all the employees whose department is HR? So in that case, what we will going to do? Let's see, right? So let's suppose we want and for now, for the simplicity, we will going to return the employee object, right? Or because in a particular department there may be a lot of employees there, therefore we have to return the list of employee, right? Because a lot of employees can be of the same department, therefore it must return the list of employee. Now get all employees of department and string department. We can write any variable name and any method name for this, for the service layer, right? Now we don't have any method in the repository that will find the employees on the basis of the department. So what it means? Do we have to implement all the logics, all the connections, all the statements, and performing the JDBC for getting the employees of particular department? And the answer is no, right? We don't have to do anything. We just have to declare a particular method on a systematic way, or we can say rule, right? So because we will getting here the list of employee, and this is the first time we are declaring any method on the repository side, right? And because it is an interface, we don't have to implement all these things, right? So this will be a list of employee. Now for searching anything in the repository, we used the find by, right? Find by, where it is the camel case, that is the first letter is small and then each word, the starting letter will be the camel case, right? The capital. Now we have to give the name of the instance variable that we are going to use for searching. So in the employee, we are going to search the department, right? So we have to write the department after this in the camel case order, right? Now we have to pass the department value like this, and that's it. The JPA will automatically make the implementation method for this method, right? Our own method, our manual method. And this is another magic of the JPA. Other than that, we don't have to do anything on the database communication thing, right? The JPA will handle it. We have to just write this method very carefully so that we will not get any error or exception from this particular repository or interface, right? So we have declared our method, okay, and now we can use the method that we have just declared. We can use this method on our service layer. So we will say return repository dot find by department. We can see it is our method that we have manually written, right? Find by department, and we'll passing the department value here, right? Now let's go to the controller and check this method, and public, we are list of employees, sorry, list of employee will be capital, get employees by department, right? In this we will have a value department from the client, and for this we will use the get mapping like dept slash and department value. Now if we want to take this department data here, we will simply use the path variable like this and string department. Here we don't declare anything in the path variable, right, that this is our department, because our key, our this value and this value is same. And if it is not, like it is dept, like if it is dept, then we have to declare the dept here, right? That path variable of dept will belong to this department, right? So there is no need here. For now there is no need. Now if you want, you can use that also, right? Now we will simply return the service dot get all employees of department and passing the department like this, right? Again restart our server and make another request. Department, it is like slash and let's pass HR, send the data, and we will have the list of employees having the department HR, right? Here we have passed the employee, right, list of employee, so that we can able to see all the data of particular employee, right? And if we write the dev here, there is only one tab here. If write something which is not present in our list, then it will give a blank list, right? So in this way we can fetch our data, required data, according to our need from the database, right? Either we can use the inbuilt methods if we need, and if we need our manual methods or our manual things, we can simply make our own method using the following syntax, right? Let's go to the next part, that we have got our data, we have added our data, right? Now what if we want to update our data, right? And this is very simple for updating any data, because we don't have to do much things, right? So let's first make the service method, right? For this we will going to write a method, and let's suppose we will returning the employee data, all data, right? Not employee add response data. But if you want, you can also return the employee add response like this, right? But for this we have to make a new object of employee add response. Therefore, for the sake of simplicity, we are returning the employee, right? You can return anything as per your requirement. For now we are returning the employee object, right? So update employee. Now it will have two parameters. First one is employee add request, right? Because in this case as well, we don't want that our user gives the ID, okay, wrapping inside the body. So in the body we don't want any ID, right? Therefore we are writing the employee add request here. So let's suppose this is the request, and with this we also should have the ID, right? We also should have the ID, and during the updation we will not going to update the ID. The changing ID is not an option, right? We are going to update all the values that is requested or that is present in the employee add request of the particular ID. the ID will not going to change, right? So at first let's check if ID is null or the request is null. We will not do anything, we'll simply return null, right? So for this method we need the request and ID both, right? So at first let's take the database data of this particular ID, if it is exist or not. So in this case we will simply take the employee data, that is db employee is equal to, and we will use the repository here dot find by id. Okay, it will search according to the id that we are going to give of this particular id. We have also seen this in there, right? And here or else we will going to throw an exception here, that is the error function new. We can throw the illegal argument exception. It is on you what you want to throw, right? So in the message we will going to pass no employee found, right? So let's suppose we have got our employee data, db employee data, right? Now we are going to update this data. So let's first check if our request dot get name dot, if it is not null, right, then we will going to update our db employee dot set name and request dot get name, like this. If our request have the name, right, if the name is present in the request, then we are going to update our previous name, right, to the new name. But this is only for, okay, this is only for this object, not the database, right? The database is not hit from this line, right? So again we will check if request dot get department, if it is not null, then we will again set the department with our request department, like this. Similarly, request dot get salary is not equal to null, right? Then db employee dot set salary and request dot get salary. And for me there is no error here, because in the salary part, if we see, right, we have used the class wrapper class, not the primitive. If you use the primitive type, then you will get the error here, right? So make sure if it is primitive type, just use this not equal to 0, right? Now we have updated all the values which are given in the request, right? Now we don't have to update the ID because the db employee have already the ID, right? Because it is fetched from the database. Now we will simply write the save method, right? And we will save the db employee. Now here, if you notice, we have used the save method twice, once for the update employee and once for the add employee, right? Save add employee, right? The save method does not create a new employee for the same ID. If the ID is already present on the database, the previous values, okay, accept the ID to the new values, right? It will not create a new value because ID is already present in the table, right? Therefore, with the help of this ID, right, it will going to update all the new data from the previous data. So our previous data will be replaced with the new data, right? Now this save return an object of the employee, right? So we will simply return this like this, return repository dot save employee directly. Now let's check from the controller. Public employee update employee, and here also we will going to take two values. The first one is the employee add response, request, sorry, that is the request, and the long id, like this, right? For this, for updating any value, right, not creating, for updating any value, we use the put mapping, okay, not the post mapping, not the get mapping. We use the put mapping. Even though for the Postman, right, the get mapping and post mapping may worked, but when we use the front end side, okay, it will throw an course or some error, some type of error, that we are going to update the values with the get or post mapping. So for updating any value, be ensure that you are using the put mapping, right? So from this update, and we will going to pass the id here, okay, this is inside the double quote. Now the put mapping can have the both the path variable as well as the body, right? So we will take this id from the path variable, like this, path variable, right? And from the body we will take the request body, right? And we will simply pass these all value to the service method update employee, and pass request and particular id, like this, right? And it will return the updated employee value to the client or the browser or the Postman, right? So let's check this as well. Now go to the Postman. Here we can, let's first check all the employee data. Suppose for the ID2 we want to change the Prashant Poddar, right? So we're going to why it is showing, okay, we have not saved it, okay, it is put, then passing the data from the endpoint, that is update slash, let's say 2, and in the body we will pass the same data, not same data actually, raw JSON, just paste it here, right? It is put na, okay, so put hitting this endpoint, and let's suppose on the 2 the name should be, only the name should be, let's suppose Anil Kumar, right? Now let's make a request. Now if we see, okay, our ID2 will have the Anil Kumar name updated, right, from the Prashant Poddar. Now there is no any department for the 2, right? We can also share the department as well. So department is, let's suppose it is HR, right? And if we make another request, then our department is HR from null, right? So in this way we generally update our values on the database, right? We are not going to pass the whole value from this, and because we have already checked, right, we have already checked from here, we are going to update only those values which have passed from the request, which is not null, right? And other values will going to have null value, right? So in this way we have updated our values in the database. So let's write here, for the update we generally do like this operation, right? Now there is one operation more, that is the delete operation. So how do we have the delete operation? And the delete operation is also very simple, right? We can use multiple ways for deleting any values, right? So let's first go to the service okay, make the delete will not return anything, right? And we can return by fetching the data, but we are not generally going to return anything on deleting, right? So we have write the void for delete, remove employee, and we are going to pass the ID of the employer like this. Minimize it. Now we can use the repository dot delete by ID, right? Delete by ID and passing the ID like this, right? So it will delete all the data of that particular ID. So this is that easy. And if it is not present, it will not throw any exception. If the ID is present, it will remove the particular data. If it is not, it will not do anything, right? Therefore, it returns the void. It will not return anything or any exception for this, right? So let's check from the controller, public, and we are going to return and map here of string and string. Now delete employee like this, and we will have the ID here. Now we will simply remove employee by this particular ID. We will call the particular service method, right, from the controller, and simply return and map, let's suppose a status or method or message, right, and employee has been deleted or removed, or the message you want to pass. Now for this we will use the delete mapping, right? So if you want to remove anything, right, you have to give the delete mapping so that the Spring Boot may allow the user to delete anything by having the delete mapping annotation here, right? So we will pass again delete slash and passing the ID, particular ID we want to delete. Now we will getting the ID from the path variable like this, right? So let's check it. So let's paste it there. It is what? Update. Update employee. It is delete employee, right? And simply delete, let's say 2. We want to delete with the ID 2, right? So we have to give the delete method here, just send it, and we got our response that the employee has been deleted. And if we want, we can check from the all employees. Now if you want to see, then there is no any data of the ID 2, right? The ID 2 has been deleted or removed from the table, right? Now there is one more method, okay, that is, what if we want to delete the all data at once, right? So let's make another method, remove all employees, and it will not take anything, right? Then there is another method, that is repository dot delete all, right? And this delete all method will going to delete all the data of employee table, right? It is like truncate or the delete command in the MySQL without where clause, right? So it is going to delete all the data from the table. Now let's call this method from the controller. Again, let's public, again map of string, comma, string, Now delete all employees. It will not take anything, and we will simply write service dot remove all employees like this, right? And in return we will going to have a map dot of, again there is a key, let's suppose status, right? And for the value all employees has been deleted like this, right? Now if we want to check it, okay, we have not mapped it yet, so delete mapping, and here delete, so delete slash all, right? Then restart our server. Now save it, update employee, just save it. Okay, delete, then delete slash all like this, right? And it is not selected, send. All employees has been deleted, right? And if we want to get all the employees right now, we will not have any employees right here. We will going to have a empty list, right? Like this. And in the database as well, if we see, there is empty set. There is no any employees present inside the employee table, right? So this is about the CRUD operation. Now there is one thing more that I recommend all of you, right? So if you understand this, it is very good, right? Now for the entity, there is a lot of annotations as well that you can use on the entity. For the industrial purpose, okay, we don't write the table name of employee. We write the class name employee, but not the table name. The table name should be in the plural, right? So it should be the employees, not employee, right? Because in Java, one object hold the data of the one employee. Therefore, it is in the singular form. But in the database, the employees table contains the data of various employees, right? Therefore, it should be the employees. So how can we rename our table, right? So it is very simple. We will simply use @table annotation, right? And there is a parameter, right, or attribute, or what do you want to call it, it is name. Now in this, whatever you write the table name, it will reflect on the database like this, employees, right? Now you will see one important thing right here, right? So whenever we restart our server, now you can see a new table has been created with the name of employees. But if you see the database, right, show tables, so it will not delete the previous one, right? Because we are using the update configuration, right, here from resources, on the resources part, where is resources? Okay, here we are using this. Therefore it is not going to delete the previous one. It will create a new table, right? If there any mismatch, if our Spring Boot or JPA will not able to find the particular table, it will create one. Similarly on the column as well, right? If you see, let's suppose we don't want to write the, let's suppose the name column here. We want that the name column should be like full name, right, on the table. So for this, there is another annotation that is column, right? And in the name, we will pass our required table column name, the column name reflected on the table of the database, right? That is full name. Again, if we restart our server, then you again see it will not renamed, right? It will not renamed the previous table. If we see, task and employees. So you can see there are two names right now. One is name and second is full name. The JPA doesn't find the full name, therefore it creates their own column, right? It doesn't delete the previous one. So these are the important things or the common requirements that we are going to use during our JPA and the Spring Boot. It's all about the more you practice, the more you get to know a lot of things. For now, in this video, we build a complete Crud application using Spring Boot, Spring Data JPA and MySQL, right? We understood the full architecture starting from the REST controller, moving through the services, repository layer and entity model. We have seen the difference between the entity and model, then repository, and how we can write our own manual methods in the JPA repository, right? And we have seen how we are connect all these things to perform any operations. The controller is here is controlling all the flow of our endpoints, right? All the operations are doing by the service layer, right? All the operations have done by the service layer, right? And all the database communication have been done by the JPA repository, right? We have used the entity as the table and the models as the data carriers, right? We have also seen entity can be used as a DTO, that is data transfer object or data carrier object, same as the model, but entity here represent the actual table, right? So it will return all the data of that particular row, okay, of that particular employee have. So if you followed along, you now have a clear understanding of how a real Spring Boot application is structured. Not only works, as well as you are able to understand the clear architecture and structure, as well as able to understand the flow of data that is going through the different layers, right? I have shared the complete source code in the description, so feel free to practice and experiment with it. And that's all for this video. If you find this video helpful, make sure to like the video and subscribe the channel for more such type of content. And if you have any doubt, feel free to ask in the comment section. Whenever I got the comment, I will reply for sure. So meet you in the next video. Till then, keep learning and happy coding. Thank you.